I don't know about you guys, but I honestly felt like January lasted like 5 months, and then February is literally just happened in like 5 days. Like, how are we basically in March already? But existential crisis aside, here we are at the end of another month, which means another monthly reading wrap up. And unlike last month's wrap up, which I'll link in the description below if you want to watch, this month includes a very vast range of books, I must say. So in this video, I'm going to go through the 5 books I read in February, and I'll tell you what each book is about, what I rated it out of 10, and what I liked and disliked about it. I'm Kat, by the way, welcome to the channel. Let's get into it. So the very first book I read this month was Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. This is a Japanese novel that follows a 14-year-old boy who is relentlessly bullied at school for having a lazy eye, and he chooses to accept and suffer this abuse in complete resignation, even when it turns violent. And at the very start of the novel, he befriends another girl in his class who is also bullied but for being dirty and having an unkempt appearance. And these two teenagers basically form a friendship under this bond, and they seek explanations between them to make sense of their torment. This novel basically questions how sustainable their friendship is when it's built on traumatic foundations. And I gave this book an 8 out of 10. This is actually the second Kawakami book that I've read after I picked up Breasts and Eggs last year, and I absolutely fell in love with the author's writing style. She has very nuanced but relatable takes when it comes to social commentary, especially regarding issues of class and gender. And she doesn't shy away from that again when it comes to this book, which is more regarding class conflicts. Heaven has really interesting philosophical commentary regarding the weak in society and why they're picked out to be antagonized. And this whole idea of othering, where other people are treated differently in the group because they have certain characteristics that are different, is very apparent in this book. And in this case, their physical traits of being dirty or having a lazy eye are the differences between them and their bullies, which is why they're picked out. And to them, it's determined how people see them and value them. But what's so interesting about this book is that the author writes 2 different approaches when it comes to accepting abuse from each teenager. One has the thought that their suffering has meaning and that they'll reap the moral rewards of this, such as character building and mental strength, whilst the other believes in a more nihilistic approach and that all the victims are just a byproduct of an oppressive society, and that none of it really has any meaning. And personally, as someone who has actually experienced racial bullying when I was younger, having this 2-sided ideology explored allows you yourself as a reader to insert yourself in the book and kind of determine which side you sit on. And I feel like it's a very clever writing choice for the reader to facilitate their own self-reflection when it comes to this. And I've never read a book about bullying that made me question my philosophical stance on abuse in such an existential way. And honestly, I was kind of spiraling at the end, I won't lie. There wasn't anything blaring that I disliked about this book, but there were like a couple of times I was like, no way would a couple of 14-year-olds be having the most nuanced, deep, intricate thoughts and intricate discussions about nihilism. When I was at school, I knew other 14-year-olds that didn't even know how to spell nihilism. But to be honest, how else would the author write about bullying in such a unique and foundational way, if not about school bullying? So I'll let it slide. I'm a Kawakami fan through and through, so I accept the stylistic choices. It's a great book overall though, and it's super short, so it's easy to get through, so I'd recommend this to anyone. The second book I read this month was I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. This is a British novel about a woman in her early 30s who is obsessed with a guy she's seeing. However, it's the classic, she wants to be with him, but he doesn't want to be with her. A toxic situationship, if you will. And in typical fashion of not being wanted, she becomes even more obsessed with him, along with the other women he's also seeing, including another woman he's dating and also his wife. Yes, this guy is a man whore. And our protagonist becomes a bit of a cyberstalker, as she forms various parasocial relationships with these women she's never met, therefore turning into a fan/stalker. I absolutely loved this book, and I actually gave it 10 out of 10. Okay, so there are 2 main reasons why I love this book. Firstly, it explores unrequited love in such a brutal, raw, and honest way. There is no filter on the protagonist when it comes to the absolute batshit crazy things that she does to try and win over this guy's affection. Not even affection, it's more attention, because the bar is honestly so low. The bar is in hell at this point. And I won't lie, if you've been in a situationship yourself in the past and you're reading this book, then buckle up, because there are some points that hit a little too hard to home. It did for me anyway. Like, there were a few too many points I found relatable, which is concerning. And although this book is short, it has a lot of short, punchy chapters, which makes it really easy to rattle through. And it includes so many good quotes. I'll read you one of my favourites. The man I want to be with wants you most when you do not want him. He prefers the chase. The point at which you become emotionally invested is the exact moment he loses interest. This is met with my own wounding, where I want what doesn't want me. He wants the consistency from a mother, but not the conditionality of a lover. When I pointlessly argue and fight with him, I feel like I'm fighting with the very structures of the old colonial forces, where he has, holds and takes, and I give, offer and ask for nothing in return. We all have teeth in our stomach for him. We are all sacrificed at the altar of his fear. Like, oh my god. But also at the same time, she literally has quotes like this. First of all, I didn't miss the red flags. I looked at them and thought, yeah, that's sexy. Like, wow, the duality of woman. And aside from the love aspect, this book has phenomenal commentary, including conversations on social media, influencers, patriarchy, racism, and status anxiety. Especially on the social media side, the author very eloquently articulates points that I have vaguely thought of before, but she writes it out so well. And a quote that's a perfect example of this is, "Aren't these wealthy aesthetes on Instagram merely another iteration of the class elites deciding what is good and what is not good, shaping our reality the way they always have, just better disguised by technology, which has the optics of transparency and democracy? Are they not the beneficiaries of the old covert systems, descendants of the children of settlers and the children of empire, left-leaning spawn from right-leaning families, who can pick and choose objects plucked outside their cultural context in some sort of static menagerie, in order to show how innately open-minded they are, even as their wealth has been drawn from global structures that decimate the cultures those objects are from?" Like, incredible take on colonialism and racism and class structures there. And in this context, even though that the protagonist is stalking a social media influencer who will literally happily drop 50 grand on a flower vase, and in other words, not all, but a lot of social media influencers today come from these vastly wealthy backgrounds, and despite trying to curate their feeds to show the most perfect image of themselves, to be also really humble and down to earth, and like they're one of the people, they're still from backgrounds made from an oppressive system that has allowed them to reach where they are. And this book is just filled with similar passages like this that has just got me gripped throughout the entire thing. I did read various criticisms on this book that people were saying that they just found the protagonist annoying and they were just like, God, why is she obsessed? Just let him go. Which I get, but I feel like if you haven't been in this situation of being obsessed with someone and unrequited love, it's quite hard to understand why she's so latched on. Because yes, admittedly, at times she's crazy and I do get her. One of the things I personally questioned with this book was how it will age, because I feel as though the book had some contextual references that were so niche that I feel as though only a specific audience in a very certain time will be able to truly appreciate the entirety of the book. Like, I feel as though someone picking up this book in 20 years would not be able to fully grasp the very niche internet references that she's making. But I could be wrong, we'll see. Catch me on this channel in 20 years as a middle-aged woman as I reread this book and tell you my thoughts. But in any case, I'm a big fan of this book. See what I did there? Sorry, that was quite a dad joke, but I'm leaving it in. The next book I read this month was My Sister the Serial Killer by oyinkan Braithwaite. This was actually one of the 24 books I wanted to read in 2024. The video is linked down below if you want to watch, but I'm so glad that I've at least read one book from that list, which is better than nothing, so there's to that. But anyway, this novel follows a Nigerian nurse who finds herself complicit in covering up the murders of her younger sister, who keeps murdering her boyfriends. Like, every time her sister just calls up in the night and she's like, whoopsie, murdered another one. And the novel basically follows her frustration in keeping to this family loyalty, but also her feeling guilty as she realizes these were seemingly innocent victims. And unfortunately, I only gave this book 4 out of 10. I had high hopes for this book. I mean, just listen to that synopsis I just gave. It sounds great. Like, sister duo, killing boyfriends and hiding from the law, sign me up. But honestly, I was just so disappointed when I came to reading it. Firstly, I disliked the characters. I just found them very one-dimensional and just very stereotypical and boring. Like, you have an older sister who isn't conventionally pretty, takes all the family responsibility, and, you know, she works tirelessly each day in and out. And then you have a younger sister who just seems so unrealistically gorgeous that she just gets everything that she wants just by being pretty, and is honestly just very spoiled. And then there's a love interest that just pissed me off. Like, the older sister likes him, and at first they were friends and she's really close to him because she thinks he's really smart, but then yet multiple times he throws her under the bus because he wants to get with her younger sister. There was just no character arcs, there was no plot development, and the whole story was just so meh. Maybe I'm being a bit mean, this book wasn't horrific, but the ending just fell so flat. Like, I was reading it expecting it to have some mad twist at the end, but it just didn't. Like, I was probably invested for like the first third of the book, and then the last 2/3 I was just annoyed and confused. Like, it's an okay read, it has easy writing and it's pretty short to get through, but I was just so bored by the end that I just wanted to finish it and move on, so yeah. Honestly, the next book I read in February genuinely made up for the last one, because now I actually think it's one of my favourite books of all time, and it's Miracle in the Andes by Nando Parrado. If you've seen the film Society of the Snow, this was written by one of the survivors. This book is about the true story of the 1972 Andes plane crash and rescue, where a plane originally carrying 40 people planning to go from Uruguay to Chile crashed in the Andes Mountains. And the book basically retells how the 16 survivors managed to survive the 72 days of horrific conditions. And whilst there's been various books written about this crash, this book has been written by the guy that I would honestly argue saved them all, because he was the one that decided to walk the Andes and find help. And not surprisingly, I gave this book 10 out of 10. You know what, actually scrap that. I'm actually going to give this book 11 out of 10 because it was that amazing. Like, even though I'm quite a quick reader, this book had me gripped. I could not put it down and I honestly finished it in 2 days. If I didn't have work, I would have probably read this in one sitting. I don't even think my descriptions now will do it justice. So I watched the film first and I was absolutely enthralled with the events by it that I decided to pick up the book. And if you're a fan of the film, I'd recommend you do the same. Because the book has so many extra details about the circumstances that we're in that were mind-blowing to read that the film just wasn't able to include. Such as it included everyone's backstories, including the survivors and the deceased, which made their relationships to each other so much more impactful. It also covered the extent of their injuries, which were way more gruesome and horrific in reality than the film showed. Like, there were so many points in the book when I was reading, I had to physically put the book down and take breathers just because it was so intense. And there's also reflections about their lives afterwards when they returned home, because the book was actually written 30 years after the crash, so it was quite nice to see like how it actually impacted them long term. But to be honest, my favourite parts of the book that stood out to me personally was just the sheer incredibility of how humans can survive such impossible conditions, both physically and mentally. The book is great because Nando basically documents every single thought he has throughout the 72 days, and it really then makes sense about what sort of things he thought about to keep him going. I'm just obsessed, and to be honest, all my family and friends are sick of me because I keep yapping about this book and they're like, okay Kat, we get it. And plus, I shouldn't be admitting this, but I'm currently obsessed with Enzo Sink, who played the main actor in Society of the Snow. Like, he's just such a beautiful man. But anyway, back to the book. I want to give a warning if you're deciding to read this that you need a strong stomach for it, and you may not particularly like it if you're not good with gore, because some of the descriptions in this book are so horrifically gory. Like, there's paragraphs about people's injuries of like muscle getting torn off their limbs and intestines falling out of wounds. Like, I was literally annotating every single page in this book because I could not believe what I was reading. So yeah, proceed with caution. And the fifth and very final book I read this month was A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. If you've been watching me for a bit, you know my thoughts with book talk recommendations. And my thoughts are quite simple. I think most of the stuff recommended on book talk are not good. And I'm sorry to say, I gave into this purely because I was getting FOMO, I'm afraid. So this is the first book in a romance fantasy series, and it follows a 19-year-old girl who one day kills a wolf while she's out hunting. As you can see from the cover, there is an arrow in the wolf. However, this was no ordinary wolf, and as punishment, she is taken to the magical land of fairy, where she's held captive by an immortal royal fairy. And she soon realizes that her dangerous learnings of the world of fairy are false, as she slowly begins to fall in love with her captor. If you think about it, this is basically a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but in fairy version. And I gave this book a 6 out of 10. First of all, I'm amazed to say that I read a book talk recommendation and I didn't hate it. I actually kind of liked it. Didn't love, liked it. And I'm not sure why, but the majority of fantasy books that I read nowadays, especially the more modern ones, just seem to have terrible writing and super boring characters. But Sarah J. Maas, you seem to be the exception so far, so gold star for you. The world building in this book is nothing new. Like, the fairy here are very much identical to the Lord of the Rings elves. You know, it's these gorgeous beings with this ethereal beauty and these superior complexes, along with the classic pointy ears. And for the characters, I feel as though the protagonist has an air of I'm not like other girls, when really she is like other girls. But I actually do quite like her character. She's more dynamic, and I feel like her thought processes make more sense. So I can actually comprehend and agree with what's sort of happening in the book, which did make the plot quite interesting to follow. But at the same time, I feel as like there wasn't any big plot twists that happened. Like, I was waiting to be wowed by something that happened in the book, but I was just kind of like, meh, okay. And look, I'm not gonna beat around the bush when it comes to the connotations with this book. It's known for having fairy porn. Like, it's meant to be having some juicy smut in there. That's at least what I've heard about this book and why people like it. But girl, where? Like, after I finished it, I was like, was that it? However, I have heard people defend this book and say that the first one is slow and it does drag on and it doesn't have much juice in it, but they've said that the second one is way better and it picks up there. So I will be reading the second book. But yeah, didn't hate it, but didn't love it. So we'll see how the series goes on. And those were the 5 books I read in February. Wow, quite a lot of books for the shortest month in the year, although we do have a leap year this year, so extra day of reading, woohoo! As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like down below, it really helps me out. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel. I make videos every Tuesday and it'll be nice to see you there. Feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post a lot more personal stuff on there, but I also post books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see my reviews there and then, rather than wait until the end of the month for me to do wrap-ups like these. And yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye!